2024 NFL Draft and offseason done and dusted, teams and rosters are starting to come together. There's still some trades and cuts that are going to happen in this offseason, but given teams are mostly in place, I thought it'd be a good time to rank all the NFL divisions from 8 all the way up to number 1. But before we get into the video, I want to take a quick second to ask you to please subscribe to the channel, ring the bell for notifications. It really helps us out. If you're a fan of the NFL, you'll love this channel as we release multiple NFL-related videos every Tuesday and Friday all year long. Now, let's get back to the video. Starting out at number 8, we have the NFC South. And if you don't agree with me that the NFC South is the weakest division in football, well, you're wrong. I mean, come on. The NFC South is far and away the worst division in football, and it's not really even close. Not a single one of these teams feels like they're competing for a Super Bowl this year or even trying to compete for the Super Bowl this year. I thought maybe the Falcons might be after the free agency period, but the drafting of Michael Penix Jr. just shows this team is looking much more long-term than they are short-term. They're clearly not in win now. The Buccaneers won this division with only 9 wins last year, and yeah, they won a playoff game, but that was against the Eagles, who were absolutely putrid in the second half of last season anyway. This division has the worst team in football in the Carolina Panthers, who didn't even have their own first overall picks. They traded it away, and the only reason they had a first-round pick was because they traded back into the first round with the Buffalo Bills. And all told, this division just hasn't gotten significantly better, even after being far and away the worst division in 2023. And so I don't think there's any argument for this division being anywhere other than last place, number 8. Our number 7 division is the AFC West, and you might be shocked to see the AFC West here, given it does have 2-time defending Super Bowl champion Kansas City Chiefs in this division. But when you look at this division holistically, you start to understand why this division really isn't that good. So last year, this division had the second least wins with only 32 combined wins within the division. Yes, the Kansas City Chiefs had 11 wins, but none of these other teams were very good. None of the other teams had winning records, and for the most part, all these teams got worse. The Kansas City Chiefs traded away L'Jarius Sneed for only a future asset, nothing that's going to help them this year. They ended up losing Rashee Rice to a massive driving scandal, and so who knows if and when he'll be back this season. Travis Kelce is another year older, and so that team just isn't as good on paper as they were last year. Yeah, they had some free agent signings and some draft picks, but I don't think it replaces what they lost. The Broncos ended up cutting Russell Wilson. And no offense to Bo Nix, Zach Wilson, or Jarrett Stidham, but I don't think any of them are as good as Russell Wilson, who they had at quarterback last year. So I think the Broncos are going to take a bit of a step back, especially given they're still paying Russell Wilson's salary, at least in terms of the cap, even though he's not on the team. And then for the Chargers, you ended up losing Mike Williams and Keenan Allen, with Keenan Allen being one of the lone bright spots on this team this past year. Yes, you brought in Jim Harbaugh, replacing Brandon Staley, which I think was a long-term good move, but it's definitely going to come with some growing pains, and I don't expect this team to be as good as they were last year either, though. I mean, at the end of the day, it's pretty hard to be as bad as they were last year either, especially when you have Justin Herbert at quarterback. But the only team in this division that I think got better, at least on paper, year over year, is the Las Vegas Raiders. But that's not enough to make up for the fact that 3 of 4 teams, on paper at least, got worse. And I think this was already the 7th best division in football last year, so I don't see them climbing at all. At number 6, we have the NFC East, and Eagles and Cowboys fans might be a little upset about this, especially given both these teams have been pretty good over the last couple of years. But let's look at the division a little bit deeper. The Eagles were absolutely pathetic in the second half of last year. Yeah, they were really good in the first half, but guess what? They were terrible in the second half. They were terrible in the playoffs. Yeah, they've had a really good offseason, but that only feels like it makes up for all they lost in the second half of last year, at least in terms of overall talent and play style. The Cowboys have really done nothing to improve their team over the offseason, just getting another year older, all told. And then the Giants and Commanders were 2 of the worst teams in the NFL last year, finishing with the 6th worst and 2nd worst records in the NFL respectively. And I don't think either of these teams got significantly better over what they were last year. And so with none of these teams, except for maybe the Eagles, getting significantly better, and with the Eagles really riding their record only from the first half of last year, I don't think there's any argument to put the division that is the only division that didn't win a playoff game last year any higher than 6th. At number 5, I have the AFC South, and the AFC South was one of the biggest surprise divisions of the 2023 season. Going into 2023, this division was ranked as the worst or second worst division in football, Yet now they're right middle of the pack to me. You have the Houston Texans, who are quite a good team, ended up winning a playoff game last year. The Indianapolis Colts, who had a winning record in spite their 4th overall pick quarterback missing the vast majority of the year. And you had the Jacksonville Jaguars, who, while taking a step back last year compared to what their expectations were, still had a winning record all told and should still be a fairly good team with some young assets in tow. The final team, the Tennessee Titans, I don't think are very good. I don't think are truly competing for a playoff spot, but they're definitely moving up in the world and are only getting better with some of their draft picks and free agency signings. And so, all told, this is a really solid all-around division. The only reason I didn't place this division higher is because I don't see any of these teams as elite. And in order to be a top half division, I think you have to have at least one elite team. I don't believe any of these teams can compete with the AFC's elite, who you'll have to beat at least 2 of those teams in order to make it to the Super Bowl, and I don't think they can beat any of the NFC's elite teams. And so none of these teams, I think, can run the gauntlet and get to the Super Bowl, even though they can all make it to the playoffs and potentially win a playoff game. At least the Texans, Colts, and Jaguars can. And so they're the 5th ranked division. At number 4, I have the AFC East, and I had a really hard time determining who was 4 and who was 5 between the AFC East and the AFC South. I ended up going with the AFC East at 4 just because I do think the Bills still belong in the elite team conversation even after the mass exodus that they've had this offseason. The Bills still have Josh Allen. They still have a lot of the pieces that did make them elite last year, even though they did lose some pieces. And they got guys like Matt Milano coming back from injury that had their team devastated with injuries last year, even though they still finished in the 2nd seed in the AFC. Beyond the Bills, you have the Miami Dolphins, who I think are still a playoff competitive team, and the New York Jets, who are going to be getting Aaron Rodgers back. Now, who knows how good Aaron Rodgers will be coming off a torn Achilles and going to be 40 years old by the end of the season, but it's still got to be an upgrade over Zach Wilson. And so you have 3 teams that I think are going to be competing or trying to compete for the playoffs, along with the New England Patriots, who last year had a pretty solid defense, and their Achilles heel was their offense, and they ended up taking Drake May, 3rd overall in the draft, who, if he works out, this team could all of a sudden be a lot more competitive than they were last year. And so that's why I have the AFC East at 4th overall. Good enough for the lowest team in the top half. Moving on to number 3, we get into the truly elite division, starting with the NFC West. The NFC West is led by the San Francisco 49ers, widely considered one of, if not the best teams in the NFL coming into the 2024 season. You don't need to say anything more about them. They're just that good. After that, though, you have the Los Angeles Rams, who had a really good bounce back season in 2023, especially in the second half. Yes, they've lost Aaron Donald. That's a big loss, but they have a lot of really young guys on this team. They have a lot of draft picks coming in, and this team should only get better coming into 2024, even with the loss of Aaron Donald. And so they can definitely improve on being a 10-win team that they were this past year. The Seattle Seahawks seem to always stick around in the playoff race and are usually within one game of either making or missing the playoffs, at least in recent years. John Schneider always seems to knock it out of the park with his draft classes. Even when you think his draft classes are terrible, they wind up being good. And so I expect the Seahawks to not necessarily be an elite team, but to still be a quite competitive team. And then you can't sleep on the Arizona Cardinals. The Arizona Cardinals were one of the worst teams in the NFL last year, yes, with the 4th worst record overall, but they were missing Kyler Murray for the vast portion of last year. And they were weirdly competitive, more competitive than a lot of people expected in most of their games last year. And so this team had, I think, 6 or 7 picks in the top 3 rounds. A lot of really high-end talent coming into this team, including 2 first-round picks in Marvin Harrison Jr. and Darius Robinson. Don't sleep on this team led by Kyler Murray and Jonathan Gannon. They could be weirdly competitive, and even if they move to 7 or 8-win team, if that's the worst team in your division, that's a pretty damn good division. Next up at number 2, we have the NFC North. The Detroit Lions were able to win the NFC North fairly handily this past year, but I don't think they're going to have as much luck in 2024 with the fact that the Green Bay Packers figured it out in the second half of last year and were very competitive in the playoffs in second half of last year, barely losing the San Francisco 49ers in the divisional round. Once Jordan Love got going in the second half of last year, this very young Green Bay Packers team caught fire and became one of the best teams in the NFL, and they're going to compete for years to come against an also very young Detroit Lions squad. And speaking of very young, good squads, you can't sleep on the Chicago Bears, who drafted both Caleb Williams and Rome Odunze in the top 10 of this past year's draft, plus adding Keenan Allen through a trade, who was a very good wide receiver last year. These guys have greatly improved the Chicago Bears offense overall to go along with a defense that was really quite good last year, actually shockingly good after they traded for Montez Sweat at the trade deadline. They've retained guys like Jalen Johnson, and this team should only be on the up and up. I expect them to be scrappy and quite competitive in this NFC North. And the final and probably weakest team in this division is the Minnesota Vikings. And that's not a knock on the Vikings as much as it is a compliment to the Lions, Packers, and Bears. The Vikings, yeah, they lost Kirk Cousins and they lost Danielle Hunter from this past season, but they drafted Dallas Turner and J.J. McCarthy to replace them. And let's not forget, the Minnesota Vikings were competing for a playoff spot until towards the end of last year, even though Kirk Cousins was out with a torn Achilles and Justin Jefferson missed a vast portion of last year. Add in J.J. McCarthy, who should be an upgrade over a guy like Josh Dobbs, as well as a healthy Justin Jefferson, and this team should only be better than their 7 wins from last year and should still compete for a playoff spot. And so when you have 4 teams that should be very competitive and all competing for playoff spots and all think that they can make the playoffs and all have a good chance at making the playoffs, it's going to be the best NFC division, and it's going to be the second best division overall. And the only reason it's not the best division overall is because of the AFC North. The AFC North is one of the most ridiculously stacked divisions in NFL history. I don't know how a division is this good in football. Let's put it in perspective. Last year in 2023, the AFC North had 43 combined total wins. That is nearly 11 wins per team. Let's put that in perspective. In the AFC, the Buffalo Bills finished with the second best record in the AFC, and they had 11 wins. And this division almost averaged 11 wins. Beyond that, let's take it a step further. With the 43 wins this division put up, that is more than the second most wins for a division, which is tied between the NFC North and the NFC West at only 35 wins. That is 8 wins more for this division than the second closest division. That is 2 wins per team more on average for AFC North teams than any other division in football. And this division is only getting better. I mean, let's look at it. Okay, the Baltimore Ravens are about the same as they were last year, but the Pittsburgh Steelers had a quarterback room that was Kenny Pickett, Mitch Trubisky, and Mason Rudolph, all of whom were starting for them last year. I'm not saying Russell Wilson is an exceptional quarterback anymore, but he's definitely better than all those guys and absolutely an upgrade. And Justin Fields, the backup quarterback, is also an upgrade over all those guys in my opinion. Moving on to the Cincinnati Bengals, they had Browning starting for half the year at quarterback, and when Joe Burrow was starting, he was really playing hurt for the majority of his starts last season and wasn't very good during that time. So if you have a healthy Joe Burrow, they're going to be much improved from their 9-win record last season, the worst record in the division, becoming the first division ever to have 4 teams with a winning record. And then the Cleveland Browns were rocking with a quarterback room of Joe Flacco, Dorian Thompson-Robinson, and PJ Walker. I'm not a fan of Deshaun Watson personally or in terms of his play style, but in terms of his quarterback play, he is better than those guys. And so it is an upgrade for the Browns to get him as their starting quarterback as opposed to those guys. So 3 of these 4 teams are going to have significantly improved quarterback play with very little losses to these teams in a division that already had 43 wins last year, 8 more than any other division. The question is not, is this the best division in football this year? The question is the 2024 iteration of the AFC North going to be the greatest division of all time? But that's it for my rankings of the NFL divisions. Let me know in the comments what you think I got right, what you think I got wrong, and let me know if you think that the AFC North this year could be the best division of all time in NFL history. We'll see you all next time. Peace!